Esther, where did you grow up?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I was born in Seattle, Washington, several months before the Great Depression. My father's grain export business went to pieces. So, as far as I can remember, I started in Seattle. We moved to San Diego. My father went into a veterans hospital in Prescott, Arizona, and there was what was called a Hooverville that grew up outside the hospital. So my mother lived in a tent, and I had a wonderful time. And many of the people there were the famous Okies, the people from Oklahoma who were veterans. Then the Democrats swept the election. My father became the assistant superintendent of schools. He was a lawyer, and but then he became ill, and he was in a veterans hospital in California, and my mother and I were visiting him, and he had fallen and died of a brain fracture. So my mother brought the funeral was in Williston, North Dakota. Then my mother went back to the family farm. So the next place after Prescott was a farm outside of Rosalia, Washington. And we stayed there a year. They mortgaged the farm so that my mother could think about what she could do with the money. We went back to Seattle. Then we went to Walla Walla, Washington. And then my mother was looking for a town where there would be a university, so she could be absolutely sure that I had a college education. Because my mother had left Rosalia, gone to the University of Washington, and had had a wonderful liberated life as a school teacher. And she had gone to Japan and China and so forth. So she was in her 30s when she met my father. And we were married in the 30s. And it turned out that she and friends, as a lark, had gone to a fortune teller who had predicted she would meet a man named Jack, or that Jack was going to be an important name. Well, my mother realized that Jack was the name of her horse. And so this was the beginning of the romance. And as I said, I had been born in April, and the Depression came.
Okay. Well, what was your family like?
Well, basically, for most of my memory, I mean, I have some memory of my father, very positive, but my memory really was of mother and myself.
Okay. Did you have any aunts and uncles or cousins important in your family?
Only indirectly, and probably more my mother's cousins, the farm, of course. But the other family, my father's family, was also very important. My grandfather was still living in Williston, and that was a big family. And then that family, in turn, spread out all over. At this point, my cousins that live in Rhode Island I'm very close to.
Okay. What schools did you go to?
Well, you can imagine. I went to school in Prescott. When my father was ill, I went for a while to Williston. Then I went to a cathedral school in Phoenix. And then my mother went to get a new teacher's license. And I was in that little school for a while, a demonstration school. Then to Rosalia, and then to Walla Walla. and then to Seattle, and finally settled in Eugene and went to a junior high, and a parochial school, and then junior high and a high school, where I didn't graduate because I went off to the University of Chicago.
Oh my.
So the schools, I think my maximum number of schools in 1 year was 3.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Did you graduate from the University of Chicago?
I did. I took my bachelor's degree there and my master's degree.
Okay. What were your intellectual interests when you were a youngster, and whose thought influenced you?
Well, I was thinking back, and one of the readings that I remember when I was in high school was Black Boy, Richard Wright. And I had always, you realize, given the kind of background I had, all the different places, I was very much aware of poverty, inequality. Eugene was pretty heavily middle class in a sense with the university. I worked in the cannery, and I met the Okies who were doing the harvest, the beans and so forth. So that reading played a critical role. Then I'm thinking in terms of the university. Now, of course, we did lots of reading. It was a liberal arts, and then my master's was a divisional social science. So it was econ, political science, history, and sociology, and anthropology. So, but I think that was when I joined the Third Order at the University of Chicago. And as I was looking back, and this seems strange, probably the 2 readings sort of outside of the curriculum, or one was linked in with my master's studies, was St. Thomas and Marx.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the interesting thing with St. Thomas that I appreciated with the Summa was his style of argumentation. He would raise a question, then he would have a whole series of very logical reasons why the answer should be one way. And then he would say, on the contrary, with another statement, and then a statement specifically analyzing the original ones. So I was attracted by the openness of his thought and the highly rational one. And of course, Marx was because my master's was on the presentation of communism in social science textbooks.
Really?
And this was the beginning of the Cold War.
How was that received?
In terms of the university, there was absolutely no problem, and I was an honor student. So there was no. I had gone on a full scholarship at the University of Chicago. We would never been able to afford it. So that included tuition, some support, and then I worked at the university through. So the whole issue of poverty and class, I used to walk the streets of Chicago where, ordinarily a young white woman wasn't even supposed to wander in. I began to be involved with Friendship House, which was an interrelation house. So when you were asking about, in a sense, influences, intellectual influences in books that deeply influenced my life, it would be.
Okay. Back to the University of Chicago. As a woman, did you find it a welcoming place?
Well, the thing is, it depended on how you looked at it. This was right after the Second World War. You had the GI Bill. So the ratio was 5 to 1, 5 men to 1. So at one level, it was a dream in terms of dating, and I, had much more of a social life than I ever. Had been a nerd really in high school, so that was wonderful. Chicago was welcoming because it fit the nerd. I mean, so most of us had been nerds in high school, and so the college was intellectually a dream. So it was welcoming. The only sense in which it probably wasn't welcoming, but there was a home for me there, was being of an Irish Catholic background. I mean, the University of Chicago, from the viewpoint of the diocese, was, well, as one cardinal had said, there are no Catholics at the university.
Really?
Yes, I mean, but in turn, the university was, in a way, almost a caricature of the secular world, even though it had been a Baptist founded. So, but they had a wonderful Calvert club, which is a Newman club. And so that became a very critical part of my life. Right. And that's where I became a third order Dominican.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you, what did you mean by third order?
Third order were you weren't a religious, but you took promises, you prayed. We used to meet monthly, and we would have prayers. We'd have a discussion, often of St. Thomas, and then we'd go down to a marvelous bar on 55th Street and have a great time.
Oh, how wonderful. I was saying, well, let's look to my next question. What led you to the Dominican Order?
Well, I had been then a third order member, and of course the Dominicans were the kind of intellectual background. I mean, the search for truth and so forth. And the third order was a very active one. I mean, small but active, which included both Catholic faculty members and primarily graduate students. So it provided a whole psychological support. And we used to go to daily mass and then walk over to the cafeteria all joyful, and most of the people would be like this, and they'd look like they want to kill us when we come bounding in. So I hadn't really thought about being a religious. I mean, the third order is secular. I mean, but I went to confession down at the local church, and at the end of it, he said, "And what do you plan to do?" And I heard myself saying, "I want to be a religious." I heard myself saying. And so he knew the sisters at Rosary. So then he made the connection.
I was going to ask you, how
or
old were...
rather, the head of the third order at Chicago made the connection, not the priest that had elicited my response.
Fascinating. How old were you when you entered the Dominican Order?
23.
23. Did this happen in Chicago?
Well, the thing is, I went home, so actually I got on the train. I met my very closest friend who lived in Southern California. We had a wonderful farewell to the world for me in San Francisco, and I took the train back. And then Sister Gretchen, who was the sister I had contact with, thought it might be good to come early. So I woke up in the dorm in a hot, I had never been in a Midwestern summer, and I sat up and said, what in the world, and what the hell am I doing here?
Oh, funny.
Mm-hmm.
Before you came to Edgewood, what were you doing?
Well, the first 3 years I taught high school in Omaha, Nebraska, but I had already been at Edgewood for a month Sister Cadgerton, who was the historian, got sick. And so they sent me to replace her. So I taught in the high school and the college. And at that point, the entire college was in the old academy building and in the high school. There were no college buildings.
Hey, I was going to ask you, so with these old buildings, so what was Edgewood like when you got here?
Well, the first, it would be like Edgewood 1, Edgewood 2, because this first one was just a month. And when I was there, Sister Nona was already planning the campus school. So I remember we all trotted down to basically old farmland that had pretty much been deserted. And she had found oil barrel down there that she figured was just about where the cornerstone of the campus school would be.
Oh, funny. Mm-hmm. What year was that?
That was 52.
52.
It was in April, May of 52.
So the high school was here, right?
Oh yes, the high school. They built the high school right before the Depression.
Okay.
So they were faced with the mortgage.
Where did you live then, and what was it like?
Then, well, I was thinking when I was there the first time, I lived in a dormitory, just a plain dormitory, which was similar to what it was at the Mount. Then through the housing range, sometimes it was a mail room, sometimes it was a small dorm. Then later on, we lived in the mobile homes. We had 4 mobile homes.
Where were they?
They were down sort of what would be behind Predlin and partly where the linkage into the high school.
Oh, right.
That area. And there were 4 of them in a square. And you had 2 small bedrooms, a medium bedroom, and what might be considered the master bedroom, which would be about as big as the corner over there. The 2 little ones, I was exactly the same length as the mattress.
Oh no.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have any good Edgewood stories that you'd like to share?
Well, I was thinking. I mean, there are lots of them, but I think an interesting one would be one of the crucial things was that Sister Nona McGreal was determined that this was to be a liberal arts education, which was to do 2 things. One is we had the academy for young women. We had our sisters who were teaching in the elementary school. We had Rosary, and Rosary was a liberal arts college. And also our sisters who were going to be teaching in high school got their degrees there. Our other sisters were going to normal school and sort of grabbing their education on the run. So she was determined to have a liberal arts school, which would be for young women, but also for our sisters who would be teaching in grade school. Okay, so the curriculum would be liberal arts with the preparation for teaching.
Okay.
Now, the thing was, when we had the first North Central that was going to be, in a sense, her vision, Regina had been built, but not quite finished. And the North Central people were going to be visiting. Well, we developed down in Regina what you might call a Potemkin village. The administration was moved down, and in a sense, so that when North Central came, we had a college building. See, the dormitory and so forth. Now, the campus school had already been built. So that's one of my stories.
Oh, funny.
there are lots of stories of Stevie, but I think you had a sense of Sister Nona's drive. She had a vision of Edgewood.
So she really was the prime mover behind the Edgewood that we know today, right?
That absolutely.
Wow. What are you doing? Do you have any Sister Stevie stories?
Well, one Sister Stevie story was she loved to go fishing. And the thing is, she went down one day to where she had been fishing, and here was a boat. And she was just ecstatic. I mean, she came, up. Well, the thing is, I realized the boat had been stolen from the the boat, whole boat area down at the Winger Park. Well, I was torn between, we really should call the police, and Marie Stevens' absolute delight that here was this boat from which she could fish from the boat. Now that was, of course, the beginning. Later was where, when we were building to Ritchie, was Stevie's commandeering the workers to bring down boards and sand to build a pier.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that was where the boat had, reluctantly the boat was given up.
Okay, what are you doing currently?
Well, currently I'm still an emerita, or that's actually not a good Latin, but anyway, in the department I have an office, and one of the things I am supposed to do is to write an early history of the department. Because initially the only major was education. Mm-hmm. The whole purpose of the college. But then social science became, I think, the two, medtech and social science became majors. So to just do the history, the early history particularly of the Department of Social Science, which used to have history in it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
What is your vision for the Edgewood College of the future?
Well, of course, you can tell that I was deeply influenced by Nona's vision of the college. And one important thing is the college is, I think her vision was that it would provide the very best in education. But it was not to be an elite liberal arts college. We were always to be serving, in many cases, first students where they were the first people in their family to go to school. So that it was, she had this image of, and in the early catalogs have this marvelous circle of all of the liberal arts, the humanities, the social sciences, the sciences, philosophy, and theology. But then combined with the image of it being professional. So that what she had dreamed of was not to have that split between specialized professional and the liberal arts. And it was in the context that a teacher had to be a whole person, and in turn teaching a whole person. And thinking there of elementary school, the teachers teach everything. So that while they, being specifically for education majors, no, but that you have a whole person who then also has the image of serving wholeness.
Excellent. I have a final question. Of the 5 core values of Edgewood, which speaks to you the most?
Justice. Nona's vision, what they used to call the Green Bible, were the books guiding growth in Christian social living, which were the whole social teachings of the church. And so, but the values, I mean, for example, compassion is that response to the whole person. I mean, you're relating to the person, but justice is that sense of relationship, is always being aware of striving for equality. You know, so whether it's racial justice, economic justice. I remember in high school we had we were giving talks for a candidate, and I talked for the Socialist Party.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, that I think that was a kind of vision shaped early, partly by my experience of being both in and out of the kind of standard growing up.
Excellent.
And being very much aware of poverty.
Well, I want to thank you very much.